So, Jim Schwartz has left the Cleveland Browns, and all I can say is, at least that mess is over. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So, Jim Schwartz has finally made his mind up, I suppose. I think we thought this would be the case at first. Maybe then a few days in we thought maybe if he's taking this long to decide, maybe he will come back. Nope, he's finally decided that because the Cleveland Browns decided to pass on him as their new head coach, decided to go with Todd Monken, even though they made it fully clear to him that they and to everyone that they obviously still, even if they were to pass on him as their head coach, would of course still like to retain him as their defensive coordinator, was still under contract as their defensive coordinator. Even after all of that, as I said, he has now decided that he doesn't want to be passed up on for a job, for a promotion, and stay as the DC. So he has decided to leave the Cleveland Browns. Going to make this a quick one because I don't want to spend too long talking about this. We will obviously do videos in the coming days, in the coming weeks about whoever they hire, whatever changes they make to this defensive staff. We obviously expect most of the staff to remain the same, but of course whether it's an internal promotion, which I think most people think is probably the most likely outcome, or if they bring someone in from the outside as well, maybe to be the DC, or obviously to just bring in the staff as a senior role. But as I said, obviously Jim Schwartz has left, and I will make jokes throughout this video. I will make jokes in going forward in the future about this. I've made it pretty clear my feelings on the whole Jim Schwartz situation. But before I do any of that, I do first, because I do consider myself to be somewhat of a good person and a nice person, and I do think he does deserve the credit that people will and I think should give to him, even with obviously how his exit obviously unfolded. It probably was a lot messier than obviously anyone would have liked. But as I said, before going forward, I would like to say that obviously Jim Schwartz was here for 3 years. He was the defensive coordinator of the best Browns defense I've seen probably in my life. So, I'm certainly not going to just scoff at that. Obviously appreciate what he did during his time here. And obviously, did a great job with this unit. And, even with, as I said, all the things that I can poke fun at, etc., etc., I think that should be the first thing that we recognise, is that, he did a great job here. Orchestrated a great defense, one of the better defenses we've seen in a long time, and certainly deserves his credit for that. But with that being said, as I said, I've made my feelings pretty clear in a couple of the videos I've done over the last couple of weeks. I've certainly made it clear on social media, etc., and how I felt about this whole situation. Of course, I think it's very, very childish, shall we say, how we've and don't get me wrong, we don't obviously know 100%. We get reports, we get stuff like that, and how it unfolded, etc. And if more reports come out that kind of say the contrary, I will of course put my hand up and say that maybe I was wrong on that case. But from everything, from all the information that is available, I do think it was, as I said, pretty childish for a grown man, let alone a 60-year-old man, to behave in the way that Jim Schwartz has behaved, for, as I said, being passed up on as the head coach. I understand, obviously, you're going to be disappointed. I understand, all of that kind of stuff. But to handle it in the way that he has, by, essentially throwing a tantrum and then basically walking away, deciding that he would rather not be associated and not work with the franchise than, maybe swallow your pride. But even still, there's no shame in still being the defensive coordinator. But if that's how he wants to put it, in swallowing his pride and remaining the defensive coordinator for the guy that obviously won the job over him. I said from the start of the process, when the head coaching search started, that if you could retain Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator, that probably would be my preference, just because obviously continuity, etc. It's proven to have worked here. but I certainly would not have hired him as the head coach. And then obviously with how it kind of unfolded, with him actually being, in heavy consideration, being by all things reported, as I said, all information we understand being pretty much in the running till the nearly end. I after all of that, I didn't really feel like how you could bring him back to be the defensive coordinator for Todd Monken, even if he agreed to, and even if he wanted to anyway, because I just feel like that's a bit of a bit of a messy situation. You could maybe get power struggles there. You could maybe get Jim Schwartz trying to, set up a group of defensive players to maybe listen to him more than they listen to the head coach in Todd Monken. And I feel like with Todd Monken, clearly doing everything that you wanted from him in the process, enough to win the job over the guy that was been in your building for the last 3 years. And if anything, as much as I didn't think that he should deserve a shout as the head coach, probably had the upper hand, as I said, just by being in the building and that familiarity. And then to be, I just felt like if you're then going to bring in that new head coach instead, just why not let that then just be completely his team instead of bringing back the guy that he had to actually compete for the job. So I felt like after how that kind of all went down, it was pretty, maybe a bit silly to bring Jim Schwartz back anyway. I've kind of been, one of the people that has just been hoping they got this sorted straight away. I don't understand why on Monday, so I can, before I say that, I can say and criticize Jim Schwartz for how he's acted, etc., etc. But I can also criticize the Browns and say, well, why have we essentially just kind of, messed around for a week? Why didn't we on Monday basically go to Jim Schwartz and say, well, we need an answer. Are you staying? Are you not? Especially before you then obviously trotted out the new head coach for his introductory presser to answer questions about it. Why didn't you just sit him down and say, right, we need this answer? Why did you let it kind of linger this long? And then for him, a week and a half, however long it's been, after you've hired Todd Monken, after he's known that he's not going to be the head coach, to then resign and say that he doesn't want to be the defensive coordinator. I just don't understand why, from both parties, if I'm being honest, we've gotten to this point. But I'm just happy now that we have gotten to this point. As I said, I can moan about that. I did moan about that at the time, but now it's done. We know that he's obviously not going to be the defensive coordinator, so that opens up the questions of who is going to be the defensive coordinator. We obviously have to make that hire. As I said, we will of course do videos when that happens, etc., etc. But just my quick thoughts on it. As I said, I think they will retain most of the staff from everything we've heard from Jimmy Haslam down to Andrew Berry, down to Todd Monken, from all of leadership. It sounds like they are pretty confident that they can retain pretty much most of their staff. Anyone that has followed this channel for a substantial amount of time knows that obviously the guys that I would love them the most to keep on this staff, is Jack Cesar and especially Jason Tarver, with the jobs that they've done in the linebacker rooms and the defensive line rooms. And, I think if we do go to the internal promotion route, they are certainly going to be within that conversation. As I said, this is essentially if you've listened to me for a substantial amount of time, I'm basically a Jason Tarver fan club. So I would, of course, be absolutely thrilled for Jason Tarver, for him to get a shot as the defensive coordinator. I would be thrilled for Jack Cesar. But someone else I would also be thrilled with, who I actually think it would be, most likely, is Ephraim Banda, because, someone that has actually gotten defensive coordinator buzz, defensive coordinator interest, defensive coordinator interviews within the last kind of couple of years, and someone that is, a bit younger than obviously a Jason Tarver, and someone that is, as I said, getting that buzz. And I do think just because of that would then, you would be more confident in, making Banda the defensive coordinator and retaining Jason Tarver as your linebacker coach, and retaining him as your linebacker coach, not just for next season, but going forward. Whereas with Banda, you might, I say might, obviously all coordinator positions are filled now. You could maybe retain him as the safety coach, I don't. I think he would maybe even get hired somewhere with a promotion somewhere else if that was the case. But maybe you do retain him as the safety coach. But then I think certainly within a season he would be hired somewhere else, whether that's, as I said, a promotion or as a defensive coordinator somewhere. So I feel like that's probably the most likely move that they will make if it is a internal promotion. I think it would be Ephraim Banda. So that's kind of where I'm at. But as I said, I would be thrilled with either three of those guys. Jason Tarver, obviously, has been a defensive coordinator before. Has obviously done it at levels, high levels. Did it at college as well, I think, as well. So, obviously that would bring that experience. But as I said, I do think that Ephraim Banda would certainly be their number one choice. And if they are going to do an internal promotion, I think that is probably the most likely candidate to be the guy. If they look to bring someone in from the outside, I think Corey Undlin is probably the name that will get the biggest buzz, the most shout. Obviously, currently the Texans' pass defense coordinator, but worked with Jim Schwartz before. Certainly someone, obviously, I mean, that Texans defense this year, one of the best in NFL, one of the best we've seen in recent years. So obviously anyone associated with that staff, you're obviously going to be, interested in, and someone that has worked with Munkin before. Obviously, I feel like that, you kind of put those things together. And if you, as I said, you were going to look to go external, bring someone in from the outside. Maybe that's you bring him in as the defensive coordinator, or as I said, he's the Texans pass defense coordinator. Maybe you can bring him in as Texans pass defense coordinator associate something. You could certainly easily slide something in there to make it a promotion, so that he can make that kind of make that move and it not be a lateral move, which obviously requires you to give up stuff for if you wanted to do that. So I think whether they brought him in, as I said, as the DC or just as on the staff, I certainly wouldn't be surprised by. And then if it was an internal promotion, which I do think is the most likely outcome, I think Ephraim Banda will be the guy to get that job. We've heard that they will start interviewing guys. As I said, I expect that to be the internal guys immediately. And as I said, Jason Tarver, obviously everyone knows how much I love Jason Tarver. I'd be thrilled for him. I'd be thrilled for Jack Cesar, obviously the work that he's done with the defensive line. But if I had to say it right now, I'd say Ephraim Banda is going to be the Browns' next defensive coordinator. But as I said, obviously appreciative for what Jim Schwartz has done for the Cleveland Browns over the last 3 years. But with how it's kind of unfolded over the last month, I will be completely brutally honest, and I can't say that I'm exactly upset with his departure. And I'm not going to go as far to say good riddance, even though I did maybe tweet that. I'm at this point, I think this is probably the right thing to do, and I'm excited about what the Browns do moving forward. As I said, appreciated for him, but he was a good DC for the Browns, great DC, whatever you want to say. But I've said this before, he didn't reinvent the wheel, and I don't think it's going to be impossible, shall we say, to find another person that can come in and run a wide nine with Myles fucking Garrett. And I don't think it would be, if they did this earlier and they actually were in the market for, these defensive coordinators, the kind of bigger names, shall we say, I think they would be, people can laugh at the Browns, at the record, etc. They would be the top of any list for a defensive position purely because of Myles Garrett. And, as we found out last night as well, another award winner in Carson Schlesinger as well. Great talent all over the Browns defense, and a young defense as well. Anyone would lick their chops for the chance to come and coach that team. So, as I said, appreciate for his time here, but I don't think it's going to be a big loss for the Browns. I don't think we're going to see a drop-off next year, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see the defense even better next year. Because if there is, one thing that I would, criticise Jim Schwartz, he's not the most innovative defensive coordinator. He can get a little bit stuck in his ways, and to see someone be a little bit more creative with all of the talent on this defense would be pretty exciting, obviously within that same attack style wide nine system. But that's my thoughts on it. Let me know your thoughts. Am I too harsh on Jim Schwartz? Are you really upset that he's left? Let me know if you think that in the comments. Do you think I'm right in saying that it's, I think it's going to be Ephraim Banda as the next defensive coordinator? Do they bring Corey Underlin in to be the defensive coordinator, or is that role? Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment. But that will do it for me today. If you do enjoy my content, please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing weekend, but most importantly, go Browns.